All right, everyone, thank you for joining today's presentation. My name is Aaron Petrillo. I'll be kicking us off here. Again, thank you all for joining today's session for the Personnel Development Program's Data Collection System, or PDP-DCS. Just a reminder before we get started, we'll be recording this webinar and posting it on the PDP ed.gov website, along with transcription and closed captioning, rather, on the recorded site. So you can refer to it later on, and certainly refer your colleagues to it as well. You'll see in the chat box, we'll include the link for closed captioning, as well as additional resources or links throughout the session. If you have any questions, please include them in the chat box as well. And we'll try to address them after, where convenient, within breaks during the presentation. So, to start off today, we will talk through a few items. First, we'll talk through the required actions for submitting data into the Personnel Development Data Collection System, or PDP-DCS. Then we'll talk briefly about some changes that have been made to the system since last year's data collection period, and we'll go through what that may mean for you as well as scholars or employers. Then we'll talk about some frequently asked questions and provide some additional tips and suggestions to improve the quality of data submitted during the data collection period. And then finally, we'll conclude the session by reviewing some of the resources available to you, as well as scholars and their employers. And certainly, throughout the presentation, if you have any questions about the content, we'll try to address them as we go. If there are specific questions that you have related to your grant, or is a very particular section or question, we may defer you to contacting the help desk. And we'll include that as soon as possible, or we'll respond to your inquiries as soon as possible, and make any follow-up that's needed from that. So, with that, I'll pass it on to my colleague Amy Bitterman from WESTAT to talk through the actions required to complete in the PDP-DCS.
Thanks, Aaron. So, as Aaron said, the first kind of piece of the webinar today will be walking through kind of a to-do list of the activities that we are asking you to complete by the data collection deadline of April 6th. And we have them broken out into these 8 different steps, and as part of moving through these steps, we're going to sort of demo for you in the system what we are asking you to do for each of these. We'll just do a kind of a quick overview right now, and just to kind of so you'll know what's coming up. So the first step is logging into the system and taking a look at who currently is in the system as your secondary user, and whether that person still should have access to the system, or if you've never assigned a secondary user, we'll go through the steps of how to add or change that person. We'll also look at the data summary that you have access to, which gives you counts of how many scholars are in each of the different record entry, program completion, and service obligation statuses, and show you how to find that information and how to identify which scholars are in certain statuses and which scholars we would like you to kind of be reaching out to encourage them to log in and enter in their employment information for verification. Then we'll talk a little bit about how to add brand new scholars to the system for scholars that are enrolled in your program but you've not yet added a record for them in the system. We'll touch on that. Then we'll look specifically at sections G, H, and I of the scholar record, because those are the areas where you'll need to be going in for all of your scholars that are enrolled and updating and entering information about the budget year that you'll be reporting on, and just making sure all of the service obligation information is accurate. We'll then talk about scholars who are no longer enrolled in the program and how you need to exit them or assign them a status of graduated, and the information you need to provide about those scholars. And then finally, we'll wrap up this section by talking about making sure you've reviewed your data and submitted all of your data by that April 6th deadline. So with that, I'm going to actually switch over to the system. So hopefully everyone is now seeing the website. This should look pretty familiar to everyone. So we'll start out by logging in. On the upper right-hand corner where it says Secure Login, you'll enter your email and password. If you do forget your password, if you haven't been in for a while, you'll click on this Forget Password link to reset your password. So I'm logging in as a kind of test grantee. You probably noticed the first time when you do log into the system, you get this pop-up message, which gives you your the OMB statement and the Privacy Act notice information, and then just some reminders that you need to be aware of. And so the first thing you'll see when you log in at the top of your screen is you'll have your grant number. If you as the project director will be listed, and then it lists who you have in the system currently as the secondary user. We really stress that you need to have, if you are going to have a secondary user that you want to have access to the system, you need to put them in the system as a secondary user. You should not be sharing your password with anyone, because the PDP-DCS is governed by federal security regulations, and if you are sharing your password, that's violating those regulations. So whether you're adding a secondary user for the first time or you want to change who that person is, you would click on where it says Add Personnel, and you would complete these fields, making sure, especially the red asterisk fields must be filled in, so first name, last name, email, and then you verify the email. So once you've saved that, that will add that person as a potential secondary user, and then you'll click on your grant award number, and where it says select the secondary user for this grant, there'll be a drop-down, and the person you just added should be listed there. So you would then select that person and click on Edit Grant. And then when you come back to your main menu, that person you added or changed it to will be listed as a secondary user. And then once that secondary user is there and assigned, they'll have an email. The system automatically sends an email out to them, much like the email you as project directors received the first time you were given access to the system, with instructions for logging in and the link to the system. So that's that first step that we're asking you to do is just check, because secondary, just making sure that if the person you have in there as secondary user is still with your university, is still, we don't want to have people have access to the system that are no longer around or are not in that position any longer. So the second step is to take a look at your data summary. So if you scroll down towards kind of the middle of your page, we have these tables that show counts of scholars by record entry status, also by program completion status, and by service obligation status. So please, on a regular basis, be taking a look at those. For the record entry status, that's really more for you to see, okay, are all of my scholars in this submitted column? That's really where they all should be. And we'll talk about this continuously throughout the webinar, but scholars should not remain in a pending status for longer than 30 days. So you really, and by the deadline of April 6th, there should be no scholars in this pending status. So just really be taking a careful look that all of your scholars are in that submitted column. Program completion status, this is another good way to check, especially if your grant has closed. You shouldn't have any scholars in the enrolled, no longer receiving funding, or the enrolled column. They should all be in the exited without completion or completed/graduated columns. And then finally, the service obligation status is more a reflection of what the scholars have done in the system. So please pay particular attention to any scholars that are in this awaiting login status, because they haven't logged into the system yet, and we do require them to log in at least annually, to be, even if they aren't yet able to enter employment information because they haven't completed one academic year, we still want them going in, checking their contact information, verifying the service obligation information, and definitely once they've completed the one academic year, they should be going in, and if they have eligible employment, submitting that. So just being aware of kind of where your scholars are in these statuses is really critical. So then if you do see scholars in this awaiting login status, for example, if you click on the View All Scholar Records, is where you see the list of your scholars, and then you can identify exactly which scholars are awaiting login to contact them. Okay, so then the next thing we wanted to talk about was adding records for new scholars who are not already in the system but have been enrolled in your program for 30 days. That's kind of the deadline we give by which you need to have a scholar in the system. Obviously as early as possible, but definitely, you know, within 30 days of them being enrolled in the program. So you can get to create a new scholar record from this View All Scholar Records page, and you also have the same link back on your main page to add a new scholar record. And I'm sure everyone on here should have, you know, done this at some point already in the past, but the first step is you're entering in the scholar's social security number, and that's to determine if the scholar is already in the system associated with another grant, because in some rare situations, scholars do receive funding under multiple grants, so we want to make sure they're all tied together. So once you put in the social security number, if it's a brand new scholar, you'll see a completely blank record for them. And I won't really walk through right now all of these sections. We'll talk a little bit more about them when we look at a scholar that's already submitted in the system and is enrolled. But one thing I do want to point out, if we scroll down to the very bottom of the page, the long page, which is where the buttons are to either save for later or save and submit. I just want to point out again, if you click the Save for Later button, that puts the scholar in a pending status. So the only time you should really be doing that is if you're filling this out and you realize, oh, I forgot to get this required piece of information for the scholar, and you can't submit the record without all of the required fields completed. So, and that's these red asterisk fields. So that's really the only time you should be saving it for later, and then you should, as quickly as possible, definitely within 30 days, be going in, completing the record, and then clicking the Save and Submit. Okay. So the next thing, which is probably one of the biggest pieces that you'll need to be doing by the deadline of April 6th, is updating information for scholars that you have in the system that are currently enrolled. So you would go to the View All Scholar Records page, and it, again, lists all of your scholars. So you would go into each record for scholars that are enrolled or enrolled no longer receiving funding, and open their record up. Definitely take a look at, in sections A, B, and C, the contact information that's in there, and that it hasn't changed. And if it has changed, please update it, in particular the email addresses, because that's our main mode of communication with scholars, so we really have to have the current email address for them. The information in D, the pre-scholarship agreement, E, demographic information, F, employment and training prior to entry, most of that really shouldn't change after the first time you submit the scholar's record. So section G is the current training program information. Much of the beginning part of that section also would, in most cases, remain the same throughout the scholar's time in the program. When we get down to items 5 and 6, though, in section G, this is what you'll need to be going in and doing for every scholar who is enrolled in the program. These two items are set up, as these tables, and there's a row for each of your budget years. So these are your grant budget years. You'll see in parentheses the dates that correspond, and that's based on the start and end dates of your grant. So it's going to vary from grant to grant, and it doesn't necessarily align to an academic year. But if we're right now talking about making sure that the 2016 budget period data has been entered by the deadline, so we'll go to that row and indicate for item 5 whether or not the scholar was enrolled part-time or full-time in the program. Item 6, how much funding they received during that budget year. And then also in section H, whether or not the scholar was employed during the budget year. And if you say yes, then there's a few additional questions about their employment that you should complete. Then the other section for at least scholars that are still enrolled, that's really critical that you take a good look at and update is section I. The first question about their status, so if they're still enrolled in the program, just that's the status they'll remain in. Number 2 is program duration, and this has to do with whether or not the scholars completed one academic year of the program. So you really, and this has a lot of implications because it's the system, once you've put in here and said, yes, this program is one academic year or more, and you put the date that they completed one academic year, that like triggers the system that, okay, now the scholar can go in and start entering their employment. Until this is selected and a date put in, the scholar cannot get in the system to enter employment. So you want to be able to get them in and allow them to do that as soon as possible so they can begin fulfilling their service obligation. Also, the accumulated academic years of funding is something you'll be updating, hopefully twice a year with every semester, and that will be going up as they, complete more and more of the program, and that then calculates out to how much service obligation they owe, and the scholars see this information on their page, so you really want to make sure that it's correct and they realize how much service obligation they owe and it's up to date at that point in time. So now one of the kind of last steps is what you do for scholars once they have graduated or exited the program prior to completion, because there's additional information that we need to collect about them. So up here for the scholar program status, for a scholar that's graduated, I would change their status, put in the date that they graduated from the program. Again, just making sure these same items that you have the final accumulated academic years of funding in here, and that date they completed one academic year of the program, and then you'll see section J is available to you. So you'll select the degree that the scholar received, the training areas related to the degree, and then if there's additional training areas, they can select up to 3 more training areas. And then this last item, which we talk about quite a bit, we're going to talk a little bit about it again, the item where we ask if scholars took an exam or measure to demonstrate knowledge and skills. The priority under which all of you are funded requires grantees to identify a measure of skills and knowledge in your grant application. So OSEP really expects that all project directors will have identified at least one measure of skills and knowledge. That's kind of a part of the program completion requirements. And while we've seen improvement over the years, there still continues to be a group of scholars who every year we see that grantees indicate either the scholar didn't take a measure or they don't know whether or not they took a measure. And this data is used for for our program performance measures. So it's really critical that you obtain that information from your scholars and get it into the system. So we recommend that you let your scholars know at the very beginning of the program that you're going to be asking for their licensure test results or any other test results at the end, and reminding them throughout the program that they'll need to pass that information along to you. And just a few other things we want to mention about this item, which is there are some test measures that I don't know, some grantees may not be aware are actually acceptable measures. If you click on where it says grantee specific tests, and then in this list, things like comprehensive exams, portfolios, defensive dissertation, oral exams, thesis, those are all acceptable measures. So just keep that in mind. If you think, well, we don't do a standardized test or we don't have a licensure exam, you most likely have one of these things. So please, remember that. And also we have continued to realize that there are grantees reporting measures that are not acceptable, we need a measure that's taken towards the end of the scholar's time in the program when they're completing the program. So entrance and preliminary exams are not acceptable, and also individual course exams and grades aren't cumulative enough to be considered a measure that we're looking for here. So those should not be reported as measures here. Okay, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. Is that it? Okay. So we do have slides, which I'm going to just quickly scroll through to display each of the steps that we just walked through. So if you do need the slides, we can give those to you with all of the steps we just walked through. The final thing is just making sure that by that deadline of April 6th, you've entered and updated and submitted records for all of your enrolled scholars, and then exited out scholars who have graduated or left the program. One reminder is that scholars, once you change their status to graduated or exited prior to completion, their records can't be edited by you, but we at the help desk can make any changes for you. So please don't be scared that when you do this you'll never be able to make changes. We can definitely make changes. Again, just a reminder, you should have no scholars in a pending status by that deadline. And scholars who are not compliant and don't have all of their data submitted by the deadline will be reported to OSEP. Your project officers will contact you to try and determine what barriers you're encountering from submitting data that are required to be submitted in a timely manner. And again, just more about making sure that you get in your submission in a timely fashion. It's part of the federal regulations that your data are submitted in a timely manner and are accurate and complete. When you submit your data for continuation funding and for the performance measure and service obligation purposes like you're doing in the PDP DCF, failure to submit your data or submit it on time could be considered when it comes time to determine ability to obtain future funding, not only through OSEP, but also other department programs. So did some questions come in that we might want to pause and look at? Okay. Sorry.
So we're just going back through some of the questions that you all sent in. If there are specific questions, again, as a reminder that you have for your grant, please contact the help desk and service obligation at ed.gov.
Okay, so one question, what if my grant personnel section doesn't offer an add personnel button? So the reason you would not be seeing the add personnel button is if you're a secondary user, secondary users cannot change or add a secondary user, so you will not have that button. It's only the project directors who can do that. So if you are a project director and you're not seeing that add personnel button, please contact the help desk and we'll look into why you're not seeing it, but that would be my guess as to why. Okay, we have the help desk information. Okay, someone wants us to differentiate between exit without completion and completed/graduated. So completed/graduated means that they graduated from the program that you're training the scholars in, or if it doesn't, I think in the vast majority of cases, programs, it does result in graduation, or if it's a somewhat different program where it's more leading to completion of a certain group of courses in order to get a certification, that they've gone through and done everything they need to do as required by your program. Exited without completion are scholars who drop out from the program before they complete or are asked to leave the program due to, academic reasons. So that's that differentiation. So do we contact the scholars once they're in the system and a year has passed, or is it the responsibility of the grantees to make sure the scholars are getting in? We do send reminders. We definitely will be upping the amount of reminding that we're doing with scholars who are not logging in or logging in once a year. So yes, it does come from us, but we still ask to the extent that you can, since you know your scholars and see them and have that personal relationship, that you do remind them as well, and we really appreciate you doing that. How up to date is the scholar information in the system? So it is 100% up to date. As soon as the scholar logs in the system, you'll see on your side their status change. As soon as the scholar submits, now a scholar submitting employment in the system does not change their status. It's only once they've submitted it and the employer has verified the employment that they begin to work towards fulfilling their service obligations, so that's when it would change to like fulfillment in progress. It will continue to say fulfillment not in progress, even if they have employment in there that just has not been verified yet. So it's completely reflective of what the scholar has done up to that minute. So someone asked, saying they have a 2-year master's program, but only 1 year of funding within that 2 years through the project, so it's confusing how to mark them at different times. So we do have that status of enrolled not receiving funding. So I would put them in that status if they're in the program but just aren't getting funding for that particular year. And then once they have completed the program, you would change their status to completed or graduated. So hopefully that helps. You want to go to CD?
Yeah, and we can address some of these during.
Okay, so I think we'll pause on the questions and come back to these in a little bit. And now Shidi Hajjasomali is going to take over with talking through the changes that have been made to the PDP DCS. So Shidi, I'm going to pass the presenter ball to you. Do I have to, how do I do this?
Go all the way down to her name. And click on her name.
Thank you, Amy. So good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about the changes that were made to the PDP DCS since the data collection last year. In this section, I first want to make sure we discuss the pre-scholarship agreements and exit certifications. I may refer to them as PSAs and ECs, but again, we're talking about the pre-scholarship agreements and exit certifications. According to Section 304.23 of the 2006 regulations, grantees are required to provide scholars with the PSAs and ECs outlining the terms and conditions of the Personnel Development Program grant funding. The OSEP developed standard pre-scholarship agreements and exit certification templates because in the past some of the scholars weren't given these agreements, or the agreements they were given were vague or inaccurate. Grantees are responsible for the accuracy and maintenance of these documents for funded scholars. To supplement these agreements, grantees must also disseminate copies of the regulation requirements and frequently ask questions to all scholars. You can find these agreements on our website, and the link is listed here below at pdp.ed.gov at OSEP Home Agreements. These are the OMB approved forms. Please use these forms that are posted on our current website. Please note one thing, that although these agreements are being uploaded into the system, we are asking that you please keep the hard copy of all these agreements until your student has either fulfilled their service obligation or they've paid their funding off. Okay, there have been some changes made to the pre-scholarship agreements and exit certifications. And these changes include clear instructions for grantees and scholars to complete the pre-scholarship agreement and exit certification and to upload it into the DCS properly. Specifically within the exit certification, there were changes made to the documents requirements to include the removal of the scholar's Social Security number and a date by which the service obligation must be completed to ensure the scholars fully understand their obligation. The Privacy Act notice was added to both documents, outlining the legislation that applies to these agreements and requirements your grant must take to protect the scholar's privacy. Okay. The instructions for uploading both documents have been updated as well. Please note the submission requirements. The pre-scholarship agreement must be completed and uploaded within 30 days of the scholar's enrollment. Please make sure they are both signed and dated by not only the university but also the student. In addition, the exit certification must be completed and uploaded within 30 days of the scholar's completion or exit from the program. Again, please make sure you've gotten the signature of both parties, including the date that they were both signed. Instructions have been updated within the pre-scholarship agreement itself. The enrollment date has been defined as the date the scholar enrolled in the OSEP-funded training program. This may or may not have been the date the scholar began receiving funding through the grant. The scholar's Social Security number must be redacted from the pre-scholarship agreement prior to uploading it into the PDP DCS. That information will be entered in a separate section. So therefore, there's nothing to worry about. We will be requiring that information within the system, but it does need to be redacted once it's uploaded or prior to it being uploaded into the system. Now, changes that were made to the exit certification. We have provided an updated instructions to items 3, 4, and 5 to clearly define the information required. In item 3, it defines the accumulated academic years and how to define durations less than 1 academic year. In item 4, it defines the calculation required to determine the total service obligation of the scholar. And finally, in item 5, it clarifies the total amount of funding for the scholar and the regulation citation to define the allowable costs. Some additional changes that were made to the exit certification are the requirement to include the scholar's Social Security number, again, has been removed from the exit certification. Nowhere on the exit cert should the scholar's Social Security number appear. Remember, the pre-scholarship agreement includes the section for the scholar's Social Security number for your records. However, it should be redacted, as I said, prior to the submission in the database. In addition, an item 6 was added to clearly define the date by which the service obligation must be completed. Similarly to the pre-scholarship agreement, these instructions outline the formula for calculating this date, which is the accumulated academic years of funding multiplied by 24 months, plus an additional 5 years, which is the grace period. Just a second. Okay. In addition to the pre-scholarship agreement and exit certification, changes were made to the grantee data collection forms on the PDP DCS. The instructions and language were updated to reflect the appropriate terminology in the field. We will review some of the specific edits in a moment. Throughout the data collection system, we have added the Privacy Act statements to explain the requirements for providing personally identifiable information. We have removed the term obligee. Instead, we have used scholars while enrolled in the program and obligee after they exit the program, where previously scholars and obligee was referred to, was referenced as how simply they've been referred to. Now we're just referring to everyone as scholars. Eliminated items that required grantee to report duplicative information or those that were overly burdensome, and then we've added data collection fields to improve the quality of data reported and ensure the understanding between grantee, scholar, and employer and the department personnel. Within Section F, the scholars training prior to enrollment was removed as it was burdensome on grantees and no longer necessary to collect. We have also revised options within 2B, 2C, and 5 to better reflect the appropriate terminology in the special education field. Within Section G, the instructions were revised for the values to include within. Section 1, instructions related to the date scholars were enrolled. Section 5 and 6, where we describe the frequency in which these sections must be updated and the definition for an actively enrolled scholar. A response option for not enrolled in the program was also added. The addition of these options allows for grantees to more accurately describe their scholars' enrollment status. In addition, we have revised the instructions regarding the age or grades of children the scholar is trained to serve. For each option, we have now included applicable age and grade and/or grade ranges that may apply. Okay, so there were also changes made to the grantee data collection forms. In Section G, the scholar training prior to enrollment was also removed as it was burdensome, again, on grantees and no longer necessary to collect. Similarly to Section F, the options within items 4A and B were revised to better reflect the appropriate terminology in the special education field, including eliminating of certain responses. The term grant fiscal year was also changed to budget period to reduce confusion and align language with the language used in the annual performance report. Similarly, in Section F, scholar training prior to enrollment was removed as it was burdensome. And let's see, again, we changed from grant fiscal year to budget year, and we updated employment and type of response options below. Okay. In Section I, we clarified instructions. We revised the response options to include programs exactly 1 year in duration, and we added pre-filled item 5 to support completion of the exit certification. In Section J, we updated the degree focus area response options to reflect the accepted terminology in the field, as you see in items 2A and B listed on the slide. Okay, so then we look at the scholar-employer data collection forms. Similarly to the grantee data forms, the language throughout the forms have been updated to reflect accepted terminology in the field. We have also added instructions and clarified questions to reduce confusion. This includes previously referenced Privacy Act statements and changes to the term obligee and scholar. The most significant change scholars will see in their data collection forms are the addition of sections A through D and G. These sections are all pre-filled displays of information entered in by the grantee and the scholar record. Some of these fields can be edited by the scholar. An item was also added to the end of Section D within the scholar record to collection information on scholars who exited their programs prior to completion. This information will greatly improve the department's understanding of why scholars may leave their programs early and potentially improve guidance or regulations related to programs. If yes is selected, the grantee will be prompted that the date will be added. If you would like more information regarding the specific languages made in this and future slides, please contact our help desk. They will provide a full list of all these changes made. I'm going to now hand the ball over to Erin, who will discuss frequently asked questions.
Thanks, Chidi. And we actually just got a few questions that came in while you were talking.
Okay.
I think the question that you might have responded to might be a good one to share with everyone. We had a question as to whether or not grantees need to, if they've already had the scholars in past years, complete their pre-scholarship agreements, do they now have to go back and use the new versions and have scholars redo the agreements?
Well, oh yeah, go ahead, Amy, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think what we tend to say is no, you don't, as long as you've used the OMB approved versions in the past, whatever the versions were that were current for that point in time, you don't need to go back, but at this point moving forward, for sure, any newly enrolled scholars, you should be using the one that expires in 2020. You agree, Chidi?
Yes, 100%.
Okay. We had a few questions come in about defining accumulated academic years of funding. And for those, because it does, vary quite a bit from university to university, what your semesters are like and kind of summers and all of that, we do have a frequently asked question that addresses how to determine an accumulated academic year of funding. So I would just point all of you to that. It's question number 2 in the regulatory frequently asked questions. And if you have kind of more specific questions related to your particular grant, then contact the help desk and we can help talk you through what that would be like for you. Someone asked a question about how to improve the connection with the employers to be able to verify employment, because there seems to be a breakdown after the scholar enters the employment information and getting it verified by the employer. Human resource departments don't know what to make of the request. Can the scholar be copied on the request so they can talk with their HR office? So for that one, no, we can't copy the scholars because we don't want the scholars to actually have the link to be able to verify the employment, just to prevent scholars from going ahead and doing the verification themselves, about themselves. But what we do encourage scholars to do is, as soon as they submit the employment, is have them call or email, or if they're in the same office, just drop by and say, hey, I know I just put you in the system as my employer. You're going to be getting an email from serviceobligation@ed.gov to verify my employment. Please do that as soon as possible. So we really want the scholars to reach out and just give them a heads up that it's coming, so they don't overlook it. Someone asked if you can add more than 2 people to have access to a grant, and no, the way the system currently is set up is it only allows 2 people to have access to that particular grant. Another question, do scholars receive email notifications letting them know they can start logging their service obligation time? So they do receive emails as soon as they can access the system, so as soon as you put them in the system and submit their record. Now that doesn't, for some scholars, if they have not completed the 1 academic year, they cannot go in and start putting their employment in, but we do want them to still be going into the system and verifying their contact information. And currently we do not have in the system but we are working towards doing this, alerting them once they've graduated or exited prior to completion. Okay, we know that you've graduated. You really need to be getting into the system and putting in your employment. So that is something we are definitely working on. So I think we've exhausted a lot of the questions. So at this point, turn it back over to Aaron.
Great. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Chidi. And again, continue to submit your questions into the chat box. As we said, we'll try to continue to pause and allow time to respond to those. Any questions that we don't get to, we'll certainly try to post responses to the training webpage on the PDP website. And then, as always, as we said earlier, we encourage you to reach out to the help desk for additional information as well, or responses to any of your specific questions. With that, we'll jump into some of the frequently asked questions. Oh, actually, Sheedy, can you pass me the ball back if you're able? Or actually,
I believe I did. Oh, okay. Sorry.
I just took it back from. So,
there you go, from yourself. Okay.
So thank you. Thank you. All right. So as you may guess, one of the most frequently asked questions we have is, how do I reset my password? And on the login page, just below where you'll insert your email address and password, we have a link associated for if you forget your password. This will send you an email prompt to reset your password, and you should give it a few minutes to be able to reset. And if you continue to come up against issues in resetting your password or gaining access to your account, again, please reach out to the help desk, and we can help ensure you and your secondary user have appropriate access to your grant. In addition to frequently asked or forgotten password, we also wanted to note that we're going to be adding an additional security component to login pages for a multi-factor authentication. So many of you may be familiar with this. If you need to access your bank account, it requires not only your password, but then also a code sent to your phone to confirm that that is in fact you, not someone trying to hack into your account. We'll provide plenty of more information as we begin to install and implement this within the site for grantees as well as scholars. But we just wanted to make you aware that that's an additional security component that we're adding to the website to ensure that you and your scholars' information is secure and the data is protected within the site. Another question we receive often is, why aren't you or your scholars receiving emails from PDP DCS? We encourage you to add the help desk or the email box that we use for all notifications from the PDP DCS. That's serviceobligation@ed.gov. We encourage you to add those as a contact in your inbox, so they won't be directed to spam. We, especially if you are just signing up for the system or adding a secondary user, we encourage you to check your spam boxes just to make sure that you're getting the appropriate notifications. And then in particular for scholars, we really encourage you to have your scholars provide contact information and email addresses that is not related to their university, since many of them obviously will be leaving their IHE and starting work. Often scholars end up no longer having access to those email addresses, which obviously makes it more difficult to contact them when data is required to be inputted. So we really encourage you to work with your scholars to make sure they provide a non-IHE email address. Again, as we mentioned earlier, adding a secondary user, we strongly encourage grantees to include a secondary user. This greatly improves the security of the site and your scholars' data, so it doesn't require you to share your password with someone. As Amy mentioned earlier, project directors are always the responsible party for all of the data inputted into the system and submitted on your grant's behalf. But secondary users, we obviously know it's beneficial for an additional person on your team or in your organization to have access to be able to input or review some of the data within your grant. Only 2 people are permitted access to the system, one being the project director, one being the additional secondary user. And that secondary user will always have a unique login as well as receive the actual emails and notifications similar to the project director within the PDP DCS. So adding an additional secondary user also helps to ensure that you and your colleagues are aware of all the requirements related to the grant and inputting data into the PDP DCS. And Amy, you want to talk through how the scholars know how many have logged in, or how to grantees know how many have logged in?
So during the demo, we talked about checking those summary tables on your main page when you log in. And I saw a few questions come in from grantees asking, well, what if I have reached out to my scholar to try to encourage them to log in and they still aren't logging in? I would definitely recommend calling, emailing, using different modes of communication, and then if you feel like you actually have bad contact information for them, if they've moved and you don't have updated contact information, then let us know and we can try to, we have some ways of trying to kind of figure out current contact information, or we can definitely help troubleshoot and figure out ways that we can be reaching out to more so with ones that are being particularly non-responsive. So let us know if you're struggling with particular scholars, and we'll ramp up our efforts and work with you on that. And also making sure that you are following up with scholars who have fulfillment not in progress as their status. So those are scholars that have logged into the system but have not begun getting the credit towards their service obligation. So it could be a couple issues going on. One is maybe they have put their employment in, but the employers have not verified their employment. If that seems to be what the scholars are running into, have them contact the help desk, and we can, resend those email verifications to the employers. And like we said before, really urging the scholars to make contact with their employers to say, hey, this should be coming to you. It's really important that you fill it out for me, or else I'm not going to be able to fulfill my service obligation. And the other issue might be that the scholars just are not putting their employment in the system. And similarly, we really encourage them to be doing that as soon as they complete that one academic year and are in eligible employment. I would think, as a scholar, you would want to kind of knock out your service obligation as quickly as you could. So doing that as soon as you're able to is important for them, so that in the end they won't end up being referred for cash repayment. And also for the data that we collect about the programs, we really need that employment information. So a question that we get sometimes is grantees will say, well, my scholar's still enrolled in the program. Do I submit their record, or do I just save the record for later? So it's those two buttons, again, that we showed you in that demo. And I think part of it is if grantees feel like, well, if I submit the record, am I going to be able to get back in the record and make changes to it? That's sort of the hesitancy to save and submit. But no, as we've been saying, you must save and submit the record, even if they're enrolled, and you absolutely can still get back into that record, and we need you to get back into that record, periodically whenever there's a change in status, whenever the semester has ended and you need to update the funding they've received and the number of academic years of funding they've received. So you definitely should save and submit records for scholars who are enrolled and not hesitate for that reason. The pre-scholarship agreements and exit certifications are one of probably the biggest things that we either get questions about, or we have to go back to grantees who may not have had their scholars, or they might have used the wrong agreement or somebody didn't sign it, this is a major issue for us and grantees. So we have a few questions on here that we wanted to walk through. For the pre-scholarship agreements, those should be completed as soon as that scholar is enrolled in the program. It should be signed and completed by both the grantee and the scholar. And the exit certification should also be signed and completed as soon as the scholar exits. And then once they're signed and completed, they should very quickly be uploaded into the system. We give you 30 days within a scholar enrolling in the program to upload the pre-scholarship agreement, and then 30 days of the scholar exiting the program to upload the exit certification. Before you actually give the agreements over to the scholars to fill out, there should be a number of checks you do. One very important one is, do you have the right version of the agreement? We've had a number of different versions over the years, and they all kind of look similar. So make sure you check in the upper right-hand corner. It should have the 8/31/2020 expiration date. That's the only version that's currently available on our website. So I would suggest just maybe even every time you're going to enroll a group of scholars, just go on the website and just make sure you're grabbing the one that has that date that's on the website. Once you've completed the forms with your scholars and both of you have signed it and you're getting ready to upload it, make sure all the pages are there. We have gotten uploaded agreements with pages missing. Also, we've gotten agreements that are not signed, or we can't read a lot of the information that's in the agreements. And finally, too, please redact the Social Security number. Of course, after you've put the Social Security number in the system for the scholar, we do need that number in there. So don't redact it before you put them in and then you've lost their Social Security number, but before you upload the agreement so that it's not included in the agreement to help eliminate all of the PII that you're putting in the system. A little bit more about the PSA and EC. When you enter a scholar into the system and they're enrolled, you won't be able to submit the scholar's record unless you upload the pre-scholarship agreement. That's a required element. So you'll see pretty quickly when you go to submit, it'll say, this record can't be submitted, you need to upload the agreement. So just keep that in mind when you're putting the scholars into the system. Again, make sure Social Security numbers are redacted. And just to kind of reiterate the importance of getting these agreements completed and signed, if in cases where we don't have a valid and signed PSA and EC for a scholar, you as the grantees might end up being responsible for repayment of grant funds. So just kind of remember that when you are keeping this on your list of things you need to take care of with the scholars. So in addition to having the scholars carefully read and fill out the PSAs and the ECs, you also need to be providing to your scholars upon enrollment or when they're deciding whether or not they want to enroll in the program or accept the funding, you should give them the current regulations, which you can access from the website, and also the frequently asked questions, the regulatory frequently asked questions, also available on our website. And when you have your conversations with the scholars at the beginning, there's a number of things that you should be explaining to them, so it's very clear up front kind of what the expectations are and what they're required to do by agreeing to receive this funding. A few of those points we've listed here on this slide. One, that still sometimes scholars come back to us and say, I didn't know this, even though it's in the agreement. So please, from the beginning, and remind them throughout the program that if they exit the program before they've completed and they haven't completed one academic year, they have to repay their funding in cash. They do not have the option to fulfill through service. Also, just reminding scholars that once they have completed one academic year, they can begin fulfilling their obligation. They don't have to wait until they've graduated. Scholars do not receive credit towards their service obligation unless the employment is verified by their employer. So they should be logging in at least annually to enter their employment, check if their employers have verified their employment. If they haven't, taking steps to check in with the employers to resubmit the employment for verification. So just please, at the beginning and then also throughout, annually be kind of reminding your scholars of these points. So the performance measures, there's a number of them that we use the employment data that the scholars are reporting for those measures. And they have suffered because scholars are not all logging into the system as they should be. They're not all putting in their employment and getting it verified. So again, it's another pitch for you to make sure you're reminding your scholars and reaching out to them to be logging in and submitting their employment. And really more relevant to the scholars themselves, if by the time their service obligation must be fulfilled, they have not put in the system their employment and it hasn't been verified, they're not in compliance. So they will be referred to the Debt and Payment Management Group for repayment. And what we sometimes run into is we have these scholars that, we're reaching out to, you're reaching out to, they're not logging in, they're not putting in their employment. So they get referred to the ARBMG group for repayment, and then once they see, getting these official letters from debt agencies, then they say, no, but I have been employed, and they have, and then so to kind of stop that whole process from happening in the first place, having them get in early on is really important. Okay, so I'm now going to turn it back to Aaron to talk about how OSEP uses this data.
Do you want to answer a couple of questions?
What do we do? Okay, well, I'm going to read this. What do we do if a scholar is delayed in returning the exit form so it's past the 30 days? Sheedy, if you want to answer this or any of them, feel free to jump in. So for scholars that you're struggling, and we do see this, you're struggling to get the exit forms completed because they sort of just fall off the face of the earth and you can't find them, please immediately reach out to the help desk so that we can try to help you track them down. We can run a skip trace to see, maybe they've moved or have a new phone number, so we have ways of trying to help track them down, and language that we can use too to kind of help hopefully motivate them by, reminding them again if you don't, that what their requirements are, and in terms of, not fulfilling their service obligation. So just all I can say is, we can work with you and we will try to help you get that taken care of. Someone asked about saving the hard copies of the agreements, and how do you know if the scholar has paid their funding off? You don't follow them after the funding. And you don't need to know that. That's not part of what you need to fill out in the agreements. The agreements are really the exit certification you fill out, immediately upon their exit. So all you're putting in there is how much funding they received, how many months or years of service obligation they owe, the date by which they need to complete their service obligation, that type of information. So you wouldn't at that point obviously know if they've paid their funding off, and you don't need it for those agreements. That's something that we at PDP DCS take care of once it gets to the point where they're not going to be able to fulfill through service. We refer them and deal with whether or not they've paid their funding off. So you don't need to worry about that.
So Amy, sorry, this is Sheedy. Just as a clarification, that might have come from what I was speaking to as they're responsible for holding on to the hard copy. We usually recommend that you hold them for at least 5 to 7 years after the end date of the grant, and that's typically how long it takes for them to pay off their service obligation. or to fulfill their service obligation, but we do recommend that you do hold on to the hard copy even though the electronic copy is uploaded into the system. This is just in case something happens, if somebody is disputing a debt or disputing something that was written within the agreement, at least you have the hard copy for your resources, and it's really for your safety.
Okay, well, while we review some of your questions, I'll just continue on here. So many questions that we've gotten in the past are from grantees about what this data is actually used for, and certainly from scholars as well. Similarly to, or related to what Amy and Shidi were just discussing, much of this data is used to actually track service obligation requirements for scholars. And when necessary, we report scholars to the Accounts Receivable and Bank Management Group, or ARBMG, who will begin a process for cash payback when scholars aren't or don't comply with their service obligation requirements, similarly to what Amy and Shidi just reviewed. In addition to that, we certainly use the data that you and your colleagues and your scholars report to identify and determine the program's performance, including measures that are reported to Congress. And we also use the data that you report pretty intensively for internal reporting, including grant monitoring, with the project officers that you work with at the department, and certainly identifying areas where we helping to operate the PDP DCS can improve, but certainly also within the department, the supports that they provide in the program itself, how we can improve it for the future. In addition to or on a quarterly basis, we create a quarterly monitoring report for your project officers, which identify key data elements within each of your respective grants. Many of them may have used this in an internal monitoring discussion with you and your colleagues previously. So this is really data that not only is used to track service obligations or for scholars, but we really do use this data on an ongoing basis to help improve the support of you, the grantees, and improve the program itself. And then, as Amy said, the deadline for data submission and updating all of your scholar records is April 6th. By that date, you need to make sure you've entered and updated and submitted all records for currently enrolled scholars, as well as those who have graduated or exited prior to the completion of the last update that you made to the system. You do not need to update records for scholars who have already submitted as graduated or exited prior to completion. Actually, in fact, once you have submitted a record for a scholar with a status of graduated, completed, or exited prior to completion, you won't be able to actually edit that record itself. You'll need to contact the help desk to make any changes to those records as you need. But again, as a reminder, by April 6th, all of the currently enrolled scholars and those who have graduated or exited since the last update needs to be included. Make sure by April 6th you don't have any pending scholars by the deadline, as scholars cannot be left in a pending status for more than 30 days as well, so make sure you don't have any scholars in a pending status. All non-compliant grantees, as we discussed earlier, will be reported to OSEP and the project officers. They'll reach out to you, the project director of the grant, to determine why the data has not been, or why all your scholar data has not been submitted, to determine what barriers you've come up against and are preventing you from being able to submit that data in a timely manner, and how we, PDP-DCS, can help to support the accurate reporting and timely reporting of all this data. And just always as a reminder, the statutory or the regulations established under the PDP program allow the Secretary to consider the failure of submitting scholar data in a timely fashion in determining your project's ability to maintain future grants from OSEP or any other grant under the department. So this is certainly a very important activity to do in a complete and timely manner. So we strongly encourage you, if you're struggling to report your grants data, to reach out to the help desk for help far before the April 6th deadline, where we can work collaboratively with you, your grantees, or you as grantees and your scholars to ensure the right data is inputted. With that, we wanted to just use some of the last few moments here to talk through some of the resources and supports we have available. But before we jump into that, are there any questions, Amy, that come in?
Yeah. So we have a question asking if you should go back and redact the Social Security numbers from pre-scholarship agreements that you uploaded years ago. We're not requiring to do that, for you to do that. If you would like to do that, that would be great, but we're not, asking that all grants do that at this point. But obviously, moving forward, they all should be redacted. Another question about why we're repeating the same information on the exit certification that we also have, that we're collecting in the system itself. And that is definitely an area that we are working to move towards. Our plan is at some point to have that integrated so that you aren't putting the information in twice. Part of it has to do with we have to kind of block off the system, kind of have these firewalls almost between the types of users so that the scholars have their area and then the grantees, you have your area. We don't want scholars to be able to make changes to information that you're entering about them necessarily. So we've really kind of kept, and because the agreements need to be completed by both the scholar and the grantee, we've really done it this way for that reason, but we are looking at ways that we can integrate it and make it less burdensome, for sure. Someone wants to know what support will be provided to completers in uploading their service obligation information. And I think when Aaron talks about the resources and support, you'll see some of those. We do have on the website in our training and resources section, we have a set of FAQs for the scholars. We have this quick reference guide for scholars that walks them step by step how to submit their employment, how to log into the system, and we have plans for more resources and technical support coming up over the next year or two to help both scholars and grantees and employers as well. Someone asked about scholars who exited the program before completing. The chart lists them as awaiting login. I assume that they won't log in because they exited early. Do you have some advice? Well, we do still need them to log in, just as we would scholars who complete the program, because they still have to complete their service obligation. I don't know if you mean scholars maybe that didn't complete one academic year and exited, in which case since they'll be automatically referred for repayment. We still would like them to log in. They can log in because we want to make sure we have their contact information correct and that the amount of funding that they received is correct, and they look at that. But they should be logging in just like everyone else in order to fulfill their service. So I would just clarify that with them if maybe they're confused and that's why they aren't logging in, because they didn't complete the program. They don't think they need to log in. They definitely still need to go in and submit their employment if they completed one academic year. If a scholar begins the right employment prior to exiting the program, does that period of concurrent employment count toward the service obligation? And it does. As long as the scholar's completed one academic year and they're in eligible employment that the employer verifies, they will accrue their credit. That can be used towards their service obligation, even if they're still enrolled in the program. This is a good question. So as Shidi showed you, for some of the items, we removed response options. And the question is, if some of the removed response options were ones that you previously selected, do you have to change those now? And no, you don't. We aren't asking you to go back and change those items. That information can remain. You'll see, like you saw in the screenshots that Shidi was going through, there'll be a slash through that response option, and it'll say this response option no longer exists. You don't have, you can keep it as that. We're not asking you to change it, but you have the option if you do want to change it to something else because something has changed with that scholar, then by all means change it. But no, you do not have to go back and change the data. There's a question about a page on the exit certification. Maybe we could hold off on that one, and if we have a minute or two at the end, we can pull up the exit certification, because I'm not quite sure without looking at the page what that has to do with. Someone asked if there's a place online that shows all the changes to the PSA and EC. We don't actually have that available online, but please contact the help desk, and we can certainly provide you with more detail over what those exact changes were. When will the additional security be implemented? I think that's regarding the multi-factor authentication.
That will be over the spring and summer. We'll be phasing it in by different user groups within the system, starting in May with administrators, and then following that in the summer, grantees. But again, we'll provide a much more extensive explanation of the actual security new additions, as well as expectations for you as grantees and scholars as we move forward.
Someone asked if the same secondary user can be listed for more than one grant, and yes, they definitely can. We know that some universities have many grants, and they'll have the same person act as a secondary user, and that's fine. That secondary user will be able to access from their single page all of the grants that they're associated with. We have a question if we've considered creating some short instructional videos for scholars. And that is one of the things that we have coming up in the next year or so, that we will be doing kind of short video demos for scholars and employers probably, and grantees as well, kind of just showing, the steps to take to do certain critical tasks in the system. Someone wanted to know about the Save for Later option being available only the first time you add the information. It's not available when you relog into the system to update. That's correct, unless you saved the record, unless you've only saved it for later. So once you submit that first time, yes, then the Save for Later button goes away. Once you've submitted a record, it's written to the database, the scholar is given access to get into the system, and then changes or edits you make are there. They're not, you can't really save those for later. Until you've submitted the record, you are able to save it for later as many times as you need to. Okay. The fulfillment not in progress status. So right, the fulfillment not in progress status, that reflects scholars who have graduated, and they are within their grace period, that 3 or 5 year grace period that they have. That's true. It could also be scholars who have not graduated, they're still enrolled, but they've completed 1 academic year, so they could, technically be fulfilling their service obligation. So this individual is asking if they should contact the scholars regarding their service obligation. Yes, you should still contact the scholars because we know there are scholars who are immediately or very soon after graduation or exit are employed in eligible positions, and we encourage them not to wait that 5 years to actually go in the system and start putting in their information. They really should be doing it as soon as they're in eligible employment, if they have it. Someone wants to know if they can still use the form with the expiration of 6/30/2017. No, you should be using, for any scholars you're enrolling moving forward and even going back, it was September 1st of 2017 when the new OMB versions were made available. So you need to use the ones that are dated 8/31/2020. Those are the only ones you should be using now. This might be a question for you, Sheedy, which is someone wants to know if the certification of eligibility for federal assistance in certain programs form, is that still required?
Yes, it is.
I believe it is. Okay. Yep. In Section D on the website, it's asked to upload the pre-scholarship agreement, but not the exit certification. So that's right. Section D is only for the pre-scholarship agreement, so you do that, the first time you're going in and creating the record for the scholar when they've enrolled. Section K is where the exit certification gets uploaded, and that is not required until the scholar has exited or graduated the program. So you won't see that section open up to you until their status has changed, so they are in 2 different places in the system. This is another, most of their students are online students. There's no communication by email. So document signatures often come to us via email. Is there an acceptable hard copy, or do those need to be sent through postal mail? So we have actually on the website available online, like fillable PDF versions of the agreements, and those, can definitely be filled out via email with your scholars. So I would recommend using those for that group. Again, you do not need to go back and have scholars fill out the new pre-scholarship agreements if they completed them several years ago. Again, as long as the ones that they completed several years ago were the OMB approved ones. Okay, so at this point, I know there are still a few more questions, and we're going to take all the questions you've asked and try and get back to some of you if we weren't able to get to your questions. And Erin's going to wrap up talking about the resources and support.
Thanks, Amy. Again, as we've mentioned previously, today's webinar will be archived on the pdp.ed.gov website. The links to the training pages, which include a number of resources, including the training recording that we'll be uploading in the coming days. That's available in the chat box, so please use the links that are available there. We've also included a link for frequently asked questions, which is an extremely helpful document, not only for you and your secondary users, but also there are FAQs on the website available for your scholars as well. As grantees, we have 2 separate FAQ documents, one focused just on the regulatory requirements of the program, and then certainly one focused on the PDP DCS and how to appropriately submit your data. I can certainly say the majority of questions that you may have, there is a FAQ with a response there for it. So that is certainly the first place I would recommend you visit if you have questions. But certainly we know that those are not necessarily comprehensive, and you may have additional questions. So we would encourage you to reach out to the help desk for specific questions related to your work and your grant. As we mentioned earlier, the pre-scholarship agreement and exit certifications moving forward, you'll need to use the versions that are available on the PDP website. Again, those are the forms that expire August 31st, 2020. And using the link on the screen, the pre-scholarship agreement and the exit certification pages or documents are both available in either Word or PDF on the PDP website. As I mentioned, we certainly have an extensive list of frequently asked questions related to regulatory issues or items. We actually have the actual regulations on the website as well if you need to refer to those. We've found they've been a very effective combination of two documents to be able to answer the majority of grantees' questions. But then, as we said, as always, we're more than happy to answer any questions you may have, whether it's related to regulatory issues or programmatic or accessing, rather, the data system and adequately inputting information in there. So we would encourage you to reach out. We're available from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday by phone and certainly by email. If you don't get, if we don't immediately answer your call, please leave a voice message or send an email address. We try to respond to all messages within one business day. So we strongly encourage you to use that resource. It's something that we have a number of staff that are highly trained and familiar with PDP, DCS, and the PDP program. And if they don't have an answer for you, they know the right place to direct you to get you the answer you need. So we strongly encourage you to use that as a resource. As we said, today's webinar is recorded. It will be available on the training webpage. We really want to make sure that we're giving you grantees and certainly your scholars the appropriate feedback and support. So we really encourage you to fill out today's feedback questionnaire, just asking a few short satisfaction questions, and then if you have any direct feedback for us on how we can improve sessions like this, but certainly also resources that we could potentially create to make available to you, your scholars, or their employers moving forward. As Amy said, we're exploring many different ways of delivering some of the content and support in addition to what we've already done, including potentially some short videos to walk through activities within the PDP DCS or answer regulatory questions that you may have. Those were identified through feedback from grantees and project staff. So we want to make sure that we're responsive and supportive of you. So the best way to do that is getting your feedback on how we can do so. So as I said, please take the opportunity to fill out the questionnaire there. As I said, if you have any individual questions related to your grant or you're having trouble accessing the system, anything in between, please reach out to the help desk. They're here to help. And with that, I think that concludes today's session. So again, for those of you who submitted questions, we'll try to respond to you as quickly as possible. If it's an urgent matter or something very specific to your grant, again, we encourage you to reach out to the help desk. So thank you all for the webinar today. We appreciate it.